Okay, so in fact, I'm going to kick off because we have so many things that we'd like to cover over the next hour with you. So welcome to this session on our Sustainability in Early Careers research report that was published back in July. And this is the first opportunity we've had to have a wider conversation about it, both with some of our key contributors, but also with you, our audience. So let me say at the outset, we are recording this session. So if anybody doesn't want to be recorded, then probably keep your camera off. But other than that, let's go from here. Now, because we have a very, very diverse audience today, we had many people sign up who haven't been along to one of our events before. What I wanted to just do in the opening 2 minutes was to give you the context for this session and for the report before we head into our panel discussion, when I will also introduce our panelists. So we're meeting under the auspices of the United Nations Principles for Responsible Management Education, which is a global movement with that mission that I don't need to read out because you can all read the screen in front of you. So PRIME, as it's called, Principles for Responsible Management Education, is global. It's got something like 900 universities, of which Oxford Brookes has been a member or a signatory since 2010. And why this is important, we think, as a movement, is that something like 1 in 3 of the world's tertiary education students study business management, law, and economics. And that's an awful lot of graduates every year. Now, whilst our study goes far beyond the business school environment, has covered every subject area that it might address. This is our, if you like, our home is within the PRIME movement, and that's our potential to reach so many students with responsible management education is one of our key drivers. And that's the global network, reaching something like 3 million students through 17 chapters and through 800, approaching now 900 signatory members. Now, today's event is part and parcel of the Careers and Sustainability Working Group of the UK and Ireland chapter of PRIME. We got going in early 2023, and we have a current network of about 180 people. And we offer a program of webinars and collaborative research projects, and that's where this particular project comes in. So we promote collaboration between universities and businesses, involving students, careers professionals, academics, HR, and other sustainability professionals in collaborative work, which encompasses both research, teaching and learning, and also employer engagement. We have a very strong focus on engaging professional services, particularly career services, within the work that we do. So when we set out, and just now a little bit of history about this particular report, and by the way, we're not planning to summarize the findings of the report through a presentation of this kind, because we're assuming you read it, or if you haven't read it, Karen is going to put the link into the chat box now if any of you want to access it. But essentially, it started off from a place where we questioned whether we were maximizing the pipelines of both the width and the depth of the pipelines of sustainability career options available to our placement students and our graduates leaving Oxford Brookes, and obviously all the collaborating universities as well. And we were aware of some kind of anomalies, tensions, issues within that pipeline. And getting together with Ollie Coles, who you can see there at the top of your page, who is one of our entrepreneurs in residence, we designed this survey, which was supported by a number of interviews as well. And we gathered data between May 24 and March 25 before publishing the report back in July. We took intentionally a very broad definition of sustainability because we wanted to incorporate or include or draw in experiences of the responding companies in relation to all of those areas, and I won't read through that list there. So if they were engaged in any or all of those, we encourage them to participate in our report, in our research findings. And at this point, I really want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank and appreciate all of the project collaborators who were involved, some of whom are going to be talking here and many of whom are in the audience today. So Ollie Coles and Ken Janssens from the Window, more on Window when I introduce Ollie, not Connie, in a moment. The UN Global Compact, and more on that when I introduce Steve Kenzie in a moment. University of Exeter, both Steve Wallace and Matthew Taylor. and of course my colleagues from Oxford Brookes University. The reason that Exeter is right up at the top of the list there is that they were the first university to come on board, and in fact they generated more responses for the survey than any other university network did. So particular thanks to the University of Exeter. But then you can see all of those other universities as well, 8 other universities from Bristol through to Westminster, and our thanks to them for promoting the survey and the uptake of the survey. Without your contributions, this survey would not this report would simply not have happened. And we hope that you can take pleasure and some gratification from the report and its findings and today's event as well. So a little introduction now to our panelists, some of whom have been mentioned already. So Steve Kenzie is the Executive Director of UN Global Compact Network UK. For those of you, and I don't want to make any assumptions about what you know about these organizations, the UN Global Compact is the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative. It's a voluntary United Nations framework, and it invites companies to align with their fundamental 10 principles in relation to human rights, labor, the environment, and anti-corruption. There's something like 26,000 participating organizations around the world, of which some 1,000 are members of Steve's network here in the UK. So he speaks with deep knowledge of companies' activities in this area within the UK context. Now, Window, that Ollie Coles is representing here today, Window helps Generation Z job seekers find employers who share their values by showcasing company DEI, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion, sustainability, and well-being data, and it offers a variety of job boards and other tools that enables students and graduates and job seekers to access that information. Steve Wallers from the University of Exeter is their Employer Engagement and Student Employment Manager. University of Exeter takes great pride both in its Russell Group status, but also its Teaching Excellence Framework status as a Gold Award holder. And they have a very strong and long-standing commitment to sustainability, both academically, but also within the career service. And then our final panelist today is Karen Cripps, my colleague at Oxford Brookes University, probably known to many of you on this call now. And she's been a driving force behind our work around Prime now for some years since she joined us. She's done a lot of work on career stories for the SDGs. She's recently generated a set of SDG employer case studies, which I'm sure she would be happy to share with you. And she's working with me currently on a Green Skills for Green Jobs QAA funded project. So at that point, that's our introduction to the panel. And we're going to kick off now with a set of questions to the panelists to get us going, and invite you from now on to put any questions that you have in the chat box so that we can come to them later. And we wanted to make as much time as possible for a reflective conversation, a dialogue with all of the people here in the room. So starting first of all with Steve Kenzie. Sorry, that's not helpful. Steve Kenzie, UNGC, UN Global Compact. Steve, when you look at the data on the types of companies that have responded and how their respondents rated their overall engagement with sustainability, what are your comments on how robust a data set that we have, and in particularly bearing in mind what you know about your 1,000+ companies within your own network?
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for the kind introduction and the invitation to participate in today's webinar and the study. It is, I think, a trickier question to answer than it may appear on the surface. Just define robust, I suppose. I think I would refer to one of the points you raised in describing the UN Global Compact, and that is the voluntary nature of our initiative. So I think it's really brilliant in the extent to which the diversity of companies in terms of their size and sectors is broadly representative of the UK economy, and that's excellent. Equally broadly representative of Global Compact membership. I think that the fact that Global Compact participants have already made a public commitment to being more sustainable probably means there is just greater awareness and engagement around these themes amongst our sample than may be across the economy as a whole. But I think it still can be extrapolated, and I think the results are still really quite meaningful. And I think key points for me, we generally are a big part of my job is persuading companies of the business case for engaging in sustainability, for being a more sustainable company. There's been a longstanding perception that there were costs associated with being more sustainable that weren't necessarily going to be offset by cost savings or increased sales or profits. And and we believe that that's just not the case, that the return on investment in sustainability is absolutely there. And one of the key planks in that argument is around attracting and recruiting talent. And so I think from that perspective, from a more cynical, Friedman-esque perception of just what's good for business, I think some of the findings here I think are really quite interesting that companies talking more about the sustainability practices that they're engaging in will perhaps give them advantage in the market for talent. And I think that's a really important takeaway that is going to be applicable across the whole economy. And I think that there's definitely rigor in that finding. Maybe I'll just stop there. Thank you.
That's a great opening gambit. Thank you. And I know that Ollie, when he comes in a bit later, is definitely going to pick up on the talent line, because talent is his thing, you could say. Karen, I want to turn to you next, though. The report uncovered some really interesting findings about the numbers of roles being offered, both where sustainability is explicit and where it's not so explicit, and also about the level of demand for roles. Now, there are a lot of findings in there, and we're not asking you to summarize them all, but what findings really stand out for you in that area?
Thank you. So absolutely following the thread of talent seeking and the degree to which organizations are explicitly, formally talking about these opportunities in job roles, job advertisements versus those that are more informal, implicit, where people need to then inquire about how they can get involved in sustainability when they're on placement, internship, or in graduate roles. Unsurprisingly, really, there was 40% across placement, internship, graduate roles that were formal and explicit. And that mirrors that sustainability specialist roles are always going to be more niche within the organisation. But 25% also highlighted the informal opportunities to get involved. And it would have been nicer to see more than 25% talking about these informal opportunities, but it certainly highlights the opportunities for students to signal their interest and their desire to get involved with sustainability once they're in those organisations. And this is important for attracting talent and retaining talent. On the second question around demand, very mixed picture as to whether the demand for these roles is lower, higher, or the same as the roles available. And that again is reflecting this global mixed picture. So if we're looking at the green skills projects that we're involved in currently, and you look at global demand for green skills, on the one hand, there's a narrative around a green skills gap. On the other, lots of people struggling to break in to those roles. And of course, our project, our data collection, happened before the ESG pushback. So it's becoming even more complex in terms of how our companies communicating these opportunities, and if it's positioned as part of risk and resilience, what therefore are the opportunities for students going into these roles. What is clear in this mixed picture, again, that 30%, so about a third of companies said that in fact there are more opportunities than there is demand. So that's surprising. And from an educator point of view, what I take away from that is it's even more important for us to be preparing our students to bring this into their recruitment processes to make sure that students are aware of the opportunities and they're ready to grasp those opportunities with both hands once they're inside an organisation.
Karen, thanks. And I know there are going to be a lot of, well, I know there are a lot of students in the room, and I know there are also quite a lot of educators in the room. And I'm really interested in their comments about those tensions between demand and supply, and whether the points that our survey have actually highlighted, Karen's observations now, whether they're borne out in your realities that you work with on a daily basis, and your applications that you make, or the students that you're advising in terms when they're making job applications. So our third, question, opening panel question, is to Steve Wallers. And Steve, one of our goals was to find out how ready employers said our students and graduates are for sustainability roles. And in which skill areas do you feel that universities can say to themselves, look, we're doing a reasonably good job? And in which areas is there still plenty of work to do? And of course, draw on this, obviously, also in your answer on all of your very extensive work with employers through the University of Exeter.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I think it was a really interesting, the findings from the report are really interesting. Overall, most employers that were surveyed said that students were moderately well equipped for sustainability work, but there are some competency gaps. And if you look at the areas where they highlighted that students had really good skills, digital skills, collaboration skills were really high, over 90% for both of those, along with critical thinking and self-awareness. So we would hope, I think, as careers practitioners, I've seen a few of my colleagues, ex-colleagues on this call. So for those of us who work in careers support and are supporting students there, and also within curriculum, it's reassuring to know that those skills are really sort of coming through to employers when they're seeing candidates apply. I think there are some potential opportunities for students to and for universities to try and upskill students so they're more ready for roles within the sustainability sector, or roles within sectors that aren't sustainability focused but have that sustainability angle. So 23% of the respondents said that systems thinking was something that students just didn't have at all. So I think that's probably something that we could look at across the board. Some of the other areas that were implied by the employers, things like strategic thinking, enthusiasm was highlighted, and said students are generally very enthusiastic, but it's how they actually can then articulate that enthusiasm using what they've learned whilst at university or within work experience. So influencing came up very highly, and being a change maker and being that person who can work within an organization to help shape what an organization's sustainability agenda looks like was really key. Resilience comes up time and time again. It doesn't matter whether it's sustainability focused or just general skills. Resilience is something that applicants, students, graduates need to have in order to succeed. It was an interesting point in the report that I read, which was around the art of being humble, and students being able to be humble when they are engaging with employers about roles. So I think overall, there's some really, really great stuff going on, and I think we are equipping our students moderatively well for going into sustainability roles. But I think there are areas that we could kind of look at and maybe hone what we deliver to best support those students who are interested in that type of work.
Yes, indeed. I mean, that was my impression from reading those findings as well. I think the findings are going to have different resonance with different universities, depending on the strengths and the focus of the way in which they're developing both knowledge but also skills in this area. Ollie, to come to you now at this point, as I introduced you and I said, one of Windows' goals is to encourage companies to report in transparent and meaningful ways to Gen Z applicants on how they're performing, both in relation to sustainability, but you have a strong focus on DEI as well. So with this in mind, what lessons do you take from the report findings about the visibility or lack of it of sustainability in job descriptions, adverts, and other employer communications?
Thanks, Jonathan. And yeah, good morning all, afternoon all. Pleasure to be here. So yeah, within this report, we looked at across internships, placements, full-time roles. We looked at two different kind of role types. There was the sustainability focused roles, And then there were roles that involved some element of sustainability, so perhaps in more traditional roles. And with the roles that were very focused on sustainability, as Karen said, we can assume that there is mention of sustainability within adverts, within descriptions, but it's actually for the other roles, the 25% of roles that are offered that do involve sustainability, where we're not seeing sustainability being mentioned. And we talked a little bit about the demand. We have at Window, we've got a community of about 100,000, largely students. And right up at the top of that are university society presidents. And we survey this young talent every year. And in a recent survey, it revealed that 70% of young talents are looking for internships or full-time roles that involve sustainability. So that might be more traditional roles in law, in tech, in finance, but they want to get involved in a company's corporate social responsibility when they're in the door. And the other, just an interesting piece on following on from Steve Kenzie's comment about the robustness of the data. I was actually quite surprised to hear that 42% of employers offered sustainability focused roles, only because we are tracking at Window the largest organizations, so listed organizations in the US, UK, France, and Germany. And across the Times Top 100 graduate employers list, only 10% of companies are offering sustainability focused roles. But I appreciate this is looking at SMEs and smaller businesses as well. So I thought that was quite an interesting takeaway. But in terms of the visibility of sustainability in job descriptions, ads, communications for the non-sustainability focused roles, more than half of employers are failing to communicate that at the moment, which, if you consider that 70% of young talent are looking for this sort of information, shows the kind of the mismatch there. And only 34% are actually including it within job adverts. And so why is this happening? I think it's because, firstly, some employers aren't aware of the importance of these topics for young people. One interviewee from the report said, oh, that's a good idea. We'll start to include it within job description. So it wasn't even something that was being considered. And then there's also the jobs boards that companies are listing opportunities on, I think haven't really been updated for modern expectations. And so typically you're putting in headline information about the opportunity, but not going deeper into the values within the organization. And also kind of like the extracurricular work or initiatives that students, graduates, employees can take part in. And then another revealing piece was that companies just thought that everyone would know they're doing the right thing. But again, with jobs boards, often the brand identity is hidden, and as a smaller organization, not everyone is going to know what it is that you do and the good work that you do. So a concern with that is if you're not talking about sustainability and the fact that students can engage in initiatives when in a role, then they might just overlook that. When they see a brief description, they might browse past it and go on to the next. So the recommendations that we've been saying is just to communicate it simply in job adverts, at careers fairs. And careers fairs is another area where, again, it's lightly discussed. It's not being talked about in free event promotion through universities. It's not being talked about necessarily on handouts, which we're not big fans of anyway, because much of that ends up in landfill. But I've been to a number of careers fairs where I will hear students going up to the employer or the representative on the stand and ask about their sustainability, ask about their CSR, their DEI, and the representative typically doesn't have the answer to the questions, and they can't be expected to. So what we suggest there is that companies have a QR code that goes through to a page on their website that talks about their journey to being more sustainable, to making their workplace more inclusive and diverse. So it's really simple things that I think could help with that talent attraction piece.
Yeah, and you've helpfully summarized a number of recommendations there, and that's actually was going to be my last question to everyone in the panel. So I think, Ollie, you've kind of covered your recommendations there already, and I'll turn to Steve if I can, Steve Kenzie, that is, and say, if you were to take one key action point from this research, what would it be in relation to companies?
I think, building on what Ollie was just saying, I think that's this idea of highlighting the sustainability elements of every job as a means of attracting more talent seems like a really obvious win. This is this is an area where a lot of work is going on. This study, I think, highlights the problem in many companies, in arguably in most companies. The sustainability team is operating in a bit of a silo, and they do struggle to get engagement across the business. And so we're doing work in this area to try and bring sustainability teams together with finance, with marketing, with human resources, with legal, to try and get a better understanding across the business of the synergies. And I think that is reflected in the finding here that HR or the functional areas of the business that are recruiting aren't seeing right away the sustainability components in their work. And I think doing so, a broader recognition of this idea that was in the study, that every job needs to be a sustainability job. And in many companies, that is in fact the case. So that was an interesting finding, that those connections to sustainability exist. They're just not being drawn out and highlighted. And I think that's a really key finding for me that I would really encourage businesses to take on board. I think that the recognition that top talent care about sustainability, it will influence the decision of what company they want to work for. Getting that onto the radar early, that this is also a priority for the company, makes a lot of sense to me.
Thanks, Steve. And I can see those questions coming up in the chat box, which I think begin to pick up on some of those points you just made as well. Steve, briefly, one key action point in terms of career services, what should they be doing?
There's lots that we can be doing, and there's an awful lot that we are already doing. I think the point that Ollie touched on, and also Steve, about green skills being they're cross-cutting all sectors. It's not just sustainability organizations where you have those roles. They're in lots and lots of different sectors. So being able to articulate in job descriptions is really, really key, I think. So I'd echo that point. Being able to raise awareness with students are very values focused, which is absolutely what they should be, and they should be looking for organizations that meet the values that they have personally, and every student's values are different, but being able to raise the awareness of organizations that have the same values with students and getting them to research those organizations really well, and career services do have a part in that. So one of the initiatives we've done recently at Exeter within my team is we've reworked all of our web pages for our employers. So when employers come and visit our site, they want to see what they can do. Very transactional, they'll know what they want to do, careers fair or whatever. But what we have embedded is a page about our values as an institution around sustainability, because sustainability is right at the core of our 2030 strategy. So I'll read the line from our strategy. We will use the power of our education and research to create a sustainable, healthy, and socially just future. So we want our employer partners to know that. We want them to know that our students are interested in sustainability. And in order for you to get the best talent and attract the best talent, you need to articulate that when you're advertising your roles or attending a fair or running a presentation or coming to meet with students on campus. So raising the awareness with students, I think, would be the key thing. How you do that, lots of different ways. I mean, I could sit on the call for another hour and talk to you about that, but I think raising the awareness with students that they can find that information linked to the employers that we're working with.
Thanks, Steve. And finally, because I want to move on to our audience as soon as possible, Karen, in terms of priorities or action points for academic staff.
So helping students to be aware not to be constrained by job descriptions and to bring up values and what they want to be doing in those roles linked to the broader aspect of sustainability. And for us as educators to be keeping up with the pace of change in career opportunities. Whatever subject, whatever discipline, whichever programme, we are delivering the transferable, transformational skills that are needed to enable the sustainability specialists to do their job. So we've done lots of work in HE for many years on ESD, Education for Sustainable Development. So those skills such as systems thinking, this is not new to us. We are doing this and we are aware of it, but we clearly need to connect the dots more with the technical aspects of sustainability that we're teaching, and to communicate and to help our students see how this is relevant also to workplaces.
Thank you, Karen. So many points, so much to, I'm not even going to attempt to draw all of those threads together at this point. I'm going to move to the questions, and thank you to the people who've been, I think there's at least 4 or 5 questions in the chat box. I'm going to deal with those first, and then if we run out of anything in the chat box, then I'm going to invite people to unmute and speak. But Miguel was first, and I'm hoping my panelists can all see the chat box as well. So Miguel, who I'm assuming is either a student or is a recent graduate, applied for a junior role for a corporate water company. A candidate with more experience was successful, even though it was a junior role. From my understanding, there's more graduates than opportunities available. I'd be interested in finding out what else I could do to improve or overcome this. Steve, I'm going to put you on, Steve Wallers, I'm going to put you on the spot. So any thoughts
from me? Come to me, Jonathan.
Yeah, strange that, isn't it? Any thoughts, Miguel?
It's a really, really good question, and it's something we hear a lot. I think my advice, my role is employer engagement, so I'm working with businesses and have done at Exeter for 13 years, and prior to that worked in lots of different roles working with employers. My one bit of advice, I think, would be for Miguel, when they're looking at particular roles, is to try and reach out to that employer before you get to the point of interview. Because if you can have a conversation with an employer prior to interview, you can ask the questions that you might not have an opportunity to actually articulate in an interview or in an application. So the competition for places is huge, and it is a very competitive graduate labour market, sustainability or not. It is hard, but it's the candidates the students and graduates that actually take that time to reach out to the employers sometimes can make a big difference, particularly if you're looking at working with an SME. So if you're looking for a large organization, sometimes that's not as easy. We appreciate that. But for an SME, I would say they're much more likely to have that conversation with you. And it's then how you articulate all the things that you've done outside of your studies that will actually help you, because your studies will help you obviously from an academic point of view, but the extracurricular stuff and why you're interested in that role particularly is what most employers are looking for. They're looking for candidates with genuine interest in that role, and you want them to not forget you. That's the key, because when they have so many applications, you are just one name on a list or a number on a list. They need to remember you as, I remember Miguel. That was the candidate who contacted me and had that conversation. So that would be my advice, I guess, and I've used that advice in recruitment and within my role as well. So making that personal connection with the employer makes a massive difference. People buy people, and if they find you personable and keen and interested and enthusiastic, you are much more likely to maybe skip a step or get that little edge on your competition, because it is a competition ultimately. So that would be my advice. And
you can see there's plenty of people who agree with that advice, judging by the little icons moving up and up the screen while you were talking there. So thanks, Steve. I wish I could get some of the other panelists for their thoughts on that, but I'm going to work my way through the questions, and then if we have time, we'll come back for additional perspectives. So Nihan has said, is the demand for sustainability-oriented careers high in the UK compared to other regions? How is it supported by government, and is it focused on more over the traditional business-oriented careers? There's 3 questions in there. Maybe just focus on the comparative one. Ollie Coles, are you in a position to comment on that?
I'm not, I'm afraid, because we track the early career opportunities only of all UK-based early career opportunities. And again, largely for listed organizations or very large organizations. And of the really large organizations, there aren't a lot of sustainability oriented careers, to be honest. As mentioned, there's like 10% out of the Times top 100 are actually offering such roles. So I'm afraid I don't know about early career opportunities outside of the UK.
Steve Kenzie, any thoughts?
Thoughts, how I can't back anything up with data, but a feeling that generally speaking, the UK has been a little bit ahead of other markets, perhaps with the exception of Scandinavia. When it comes to sustainability, many of the biggest global NGOs and sustainable investment initiatives are based in the UK. So I think it's likely there are more opportunities here in this space than in other markets, but that's evolving really quite rapidly as we see the effects of the walking back from sustainability commitments that we're seeing in the USA having slightly stronger impact in the UK than in some other markets. So it's a constantly moving thing, but I wouldn't think it was materially different here than in most other, certainly developed country markets. But we're seeing interest in sustainability and corporate sustainability is actually on the rise across Asia and Africa. So I do see that there's lots of potential there for it to be picking up.
Okay, sorry. So we can offer a kind of partial answer, some partial insights there, but nothing definitive in that particular case. Petra's asked a question which is to Steve Kenzie, so I'm going to have to come back to you again, or it's a pleasure to come back to you. Do companies value systems thinking? Is this a competency, in your opinion, that many leaders in industry have? And are there efforts within companies to increase this competency? And could it and should it be picked up in executive education? Well, leave the executive education possibly on one side, but what's your experience of the presence or otherwise of this competency within senior leaders?
I'm at a little bit of a, I guess I have a question. Just I'm maybe thinking you guys may have an accepted definition of systems thinking. I'm a little fuzzy around just what exactly, how we would define that. I think that it's a challenge, is so often the case in entry-level positions that you're probably not working on systems. You're probably going to be in a role that's fairly focused. So, but absolutely systems thinking is going to be valued as you progress in your career. And I think many companies will be looking for that because they're hiring for an entry-level position. But the reality is they're never hiring someone for an entry-level position that they think is going to stay there. They're thinking ahead and they want to have people that have the skills for more senior roles that they can grow with the company. So it's less valuable, I think, in entry-level positions, but I may just not be putting enough into the definition. I know I certainly see it's so important to be able to make connections across themes, across topics. And that's an immensely valuable skill that we don't see enough of. And so I think someone that can demonstrate that is certainly going to be an advantage. I think at entry level, probably just really pure critical thinking and good judgment is probably easier to evaluate and more important in those initial roles. But I absolutely think to the follow-on question, are there efforts within companies to increase this competency? I think if there aren't, that's something that's got to be on the radar, and we're going to start seeing more of that as more and more of the challenges we're trying to overcome can only be addressed through systems thinking and systems change.
Thinking out aloud there, it might be worth Karen and I sort of thinking about having that as a particular separate topic actually for another webinar at some point, given this is quite an interesting finding from our research. I'm going to move on through the questions because there's a lot still to get through. So Luke has asked, how or is the greenwash fear stopping businesses communicating sustainability? Ollie, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I comment on that. So listed organizations, again, are required to report certain metrics on an annual basis about their greenhouse gas emissions and sustainability. And when it comes to, I would like to think that the fear of getting in trouble for greenwashing would not stop companies talking about the good work that they're doing. I think as long as they are doing things that are protecting the environment, they're making positive steps, then there's no harm in talking about it. Of course, there are, and I know there's a question further down about this, there is a fear of releasing certain data nowadays because of backlash on DEI and even on net zero. So there are companies that are holding back from sharing data that they used to share. And we're seeing that a lot at Window. We've got a diversity reporting barometer that tracks what companies are reporting on, and the drop this year has been significant. But I would like to think that if a company is doing the right thing around the environment, that they can communicate it, they can talk about it, and they can be clear about their initiative. So it shouldn't hold them back from communicating.
Thank you. I'm going to resist going back to Steve Kenzie on that question, in the interest of trying to get through some more of the questions that we've got here. Let me see, make sure that I think Osana was making a comment rather than a question. So I'm going to go to there was a question. Oh, sorry, I've missed it in relation to AI, which I think was an interesting question. And Steve Wallace, I wonder whether you want to have a go in this one. Do you have any advice for those of us looking for sustainable roles in industries increasingly overtaken by AI, especially generative AI, in terms of jobs being reduced due to AI and available jobs often being heavily AI centric? So there's a second part of the question, but let's just stick with that part in the interest of moving on to other questions afterwards.
Yeah, it's a really good question and something we kind of grapple with on a daily basis within our service about how we support students to navigate that landscape. I think the reassuring thing, or if it is reassuring, is that employers are also struggling to grapple with the topic of AI and how they utilize it within their business. I was at a conference a few months ago. The whole conference was talking about AI. It was a graduate recruitment conference. Everyone was talking about AI. So businesses are still looking at how AI can change their business, streamline their business, create efficiencies. That ultimately over time is going to result in companies molding roles differently so that you're not the typical jobs that were there that could be replaced by AI will morph into different roles. So it's more of a case of keeping an eye on the sector and the type of job roles that are being promoted and seeing what type of changes that businesses are adopting, because we're all struggling to use AI in a daily basis. I guess one of the big things that we say to students with AI is it's a tool. That is all it is. It is not the definitive answer to all your problems. So businesses are also finding that it's not going to solve all their issues. It might help some of their challenges within their business, but it's not going to solve them all. And they are still going to need bright, intelligent, enthusiastic candidates who are going to come in and work in their business to develop the business further. So I haven't really given an answer to that, but just be reassured that you are not alone with trying to get your head around the world of AI in the world of work, because employers are doing exactly the same, trying to determine how they're going to use it.
Not entirely related to that, but I caught a headline the other day saying that the Bank of England was concerned that far too many companies, AI-focused companies, were overvalued because the business returns on AI were not being demonstrated in the way that the valuation of the company might suggest. So a degree of kind of skepticism entering into some debates. So I'm moving on to another question now, which was from Ranjit, saying, and I'm paraphrasing parts of it, sustainability-related jobs are highly influenced through government policies and decisions. How good is it going to be in the future? Will the market for sustainability, is it going to remain volatile? And I think this is probably drawing on a variety of different government interventions in recent past, particularly perhaps in the United States. Steve Kenzie, I know you've got from other quarters, you've got a relatively optimistic view on this. Do you want to come in and comment?
So it is somewhat dependent on location again, but I certainly think here in the UK and probably outside of the USA under the current regime, there's a strong business case for sustainability. And so businesses are embracing this not from any particular desire to do the right thing or to be altruistic, but because they perceive preparing for the effects of climate change is the way to future-proof the business. To have diversity and inclusivity in their hiring practices is the way to improve the strength of their business. Across the ESG agenda, there is a robust business case. So government policies can enhance that business case, or they can erode it, as we're seeing in the USA right now. But I think here in the UK, sure, there's some risk. The way the political winds seem to be blowing just now, that government policies around sustainability could go in an unhelpful direction. But I think it would be premature to react to that too strongly. I think the reality, if we just keep it reality based, the climate is changing because of carbon emissions, mostly coming from businesses. That needs to be addressed. Companies are addressing it in order to remain relevant and to have a future. So I think that ensuring that you have some sustainability component in your training and in your own career planning, I think that's wise. I just heard from an academic, though, just the day before yesterday, talking about the situation in the States. And of course, there it is a dramatically different story. We're kind of all these points about fears about greenwashing, and I think that this expression of green hushing is really full on in that market, where people are actually being a little bit shy about talking about some of their sustainability credentials, and companies are being more quiet about it too, just to stay under the radar and not attract unwanted attention. But I think in this market, it's still positive attention, generally speaking, for having sustainability skills and for seeking those skills.
And in fact, I'll just also say there was an interesting Harvard Business Review article and a piece of research which came out last week or the week before, which actually tracked a number of bigger companies and their response to exactly these issues that are being raised in the United States. And actually, there was cause for cautious optimism even within that report as well. It wasn't an entirely cut and dried picture. Ollie, I'm going to come to you quickly, and then I want to get on to the next question.
Really quick, just to say that in the next 5 years, a third of the global workforce is going to be Gen Z. Gen Z care about sustainability. They care about doing the right thing. So I think that we can only see if they're going into that workforce that this stuff is going to have to continue in the right direction.
Thanks, Ollie. The next question I'm going to ask Karen to comment on. In the report, an employer mentioned that they were looking more at attitude and skill set when hiring for placements. Would employers consider training students from courses which aren't as focused on an area of sustainability? Would they consider that worth the resources? It's a wide question, but any take on that, Karen?
I'm not sure I've got the gist with as worth the resources, but it's absolutely all about attitude, being authentic in looking for these sustainability roles. It was clear that some people are actually jumping on the sustainability bandwagon and trying to pretend an interest in sustainability, and employers can notice that they really do want that thread of genuine commitment, which is illustrating an attitude and true values for sustainability, and that comes through the extracurricular, the kind of projects that people have got involved in. And on this note, also around attitude, and following on from the previous discussion, I follow a great deal what's happening in the US with lots of community groups. There's something called Work for Climate, and there is a huge movement of grassroots initiatives, employees that are, it might not be apparent at governmental level and at senior executive level, but it's those employees who are advocating for change and using their voices for change and becoming the leaders that organisations are seeking by perhaps it's not explicit to us yet, but there is a continuing great deal of action happening in the US. And if you follow any of the kind of groups that work for Climate of God, you can see that very clearly, which there's a lot of good attitudes happening.
Thanks, Karen. We have another question, which is very specifically about somebody with an MSc in financial data science. Would we be eligible for sustainability roles? I mean, Steve Watters, might you be in a position to comment on that, as in broad terms?
I think the answer is yes. I think it comes back to Karen's point about the authenticity of students and graduates when they're applying for roles. So if you're doing an MSc in financial data science, but you have a genuine interest in sustainability and can articulate why you have that and what evidence you've got of your interest in that area, whether that's being involved with a sustainability project on campus or doing something in the community, the degree is one thing, but your extracurricular work and your drive and enthusiasm for that topic will be the thing that gets you through. So I kind of echo Karen's point on the last question, but also on this one, absolutely, yes, you're eligible. Typically, we only find with employers where degree disciplines are completely linked to a job role is when they are very vocational. So you cannot be a doctor without a medicine degree. It's kind of well, you could try, but you probably wouldn't do very well. But certain subject areas lend themselves to different job roles. So typically, in my experience from companies that I work with, they're not so worried about the actual subject of the degree that the student is studying. It's more around their skill set, enthusiasm, and drive for the role. So yeah, if you're doing MSc financial data science, I would say yes, you are eligible for sustainability roles.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for that encouragement. I can see, I'm aware that we've only got about 7 minutes left in our session. I'm just heading on down. There are a number of people, thank you, Nick Wilton, making comments and observations that I'm not necessarily going to pick up as questions. And Miguel was wanting to know whether he could put his LinkedIn connection, his LinkedIn link in here. And of course you can. Yeah, I'm sure people would be happy to make contact with you. And we got a number of questions around. Well, I'll come back to this question because obviously systems thinking it's interested Petra. There's a student I think it's a student. Sorry, I've lost track exactly where it is in the chat box, but somebody's saying, what can we as students do to develop our systems thinking skills? And I'm going to put Karen on the spot to see whether she wants to comment on that.
To get involved as in as many projects as possible across the university, because that is naturally enhancing your systems thinking skills by seeing the connections between different subjects, working with students from other subject areas. So getting involved in any extracurricular projects that are available to you. There's networks such as Prime UK and Ireland, where we're obviously working, and Prime Global students that you can get involved with, working with students across different cultures. So expanding your networks as much as possible. And that's linking back to what Steve originally talked about in being able to reach out to people and to have those early conversations and to make it memorable and to build those stories. And it's through that storytelling and those experiences that you have that you will make the difference.
Thanks, Karen. I know there are other questions in the chat box. We will find a way of responding to you because we have your contact details if we haven't addressed those questions after today. But I have a final round of questions that I want to put to the panel before we close at 1 o'clock, which take us right back to the origins of this piece of work and the origins of this seminar, this was a research project. And we think it's very important that we continue to engage in collaborative research in this area of careers and sustainability. And my question to all of the panel in closing is, could you, because we're keen to sponsor future research projects, in your view, what are the kinds of research projects that could usefully build on the findings of this report? Steve Kenzie.
I must have missed this question in the notes. So I think it's a really Well, I think I'd be interested in going beyond entry level. So I think that uh, would be one thing. Sustainability teams are often bringing in people from other functional areas, and I think that would be interesting to have a better picture of who is working in there and perhaps what are the fields um, people are transferring in from with the greatest regularity. That might be again providing some insight to students on alternative career paths. If you're not able to get in to sustainability in your first job, maybe you can with your second or third. And so I think that would be interesting. Um, I'm fascinated by unpaid internships in a sort of morbid way. I think they're clearly wrong, and I'm curious and was surprised and disappointed at the high number of companies that were still offering that. And I think that would be an interesting discussion on all sides. Feels like a win-win for the student, potentially the intern, and for the company, but from a societal perspective, it's a really a bad thing. It'd be really interesting to get a better understanding around that and perhaps um, shape ideas of companies and others as to how we should approach it. Thanks.
Wow, thanks, Steve. That's two ideas, not one. I can see those projects emerging already. Obviously, this is trying to speak also to the educators in the room who may be involved in research of this nature and interested in collaborations both with us at Brooks and with other people in the room as well. So thanks, Steve, for getting us off a good start there. Ollie Coles, any suggestions?
Sorry, take myself off mute. Yeah, I think the interesting side for me again is the opportunities that involve sustainability and less focused on sustainability. So I would love to hear from graduates that have gone into those traditional roles that do involve sustainability, and they've been in those roles for a year or two, and whether or not those organizations are meeting the employees' expectations when it comes to drive sustainability. So what's actually happening once they're in the organization.
So the kind of mid-career theme emerging or beyond initial early career stage. Thank you. And Steve Wallace.
Yeah, I think from a careers practitioner's point of view, it would be useful to do some research around interventions that different HEIs have put in place to support their students to develop them to become more sustainability focused. There's a professional body for career services, ADCAS, who are very collaborative in the way they work. But I think it would be interesting to see how we could utilize the data that's come from this research, which is very much employer focused and their thoughts, and then map that against what universities are doing and seeing what the synergies are and where we've got connections and things that we're doing well at institutional level, HE level, that will actually help businesses recruit the best candidates. So not sure that's a research paper, but I would be very interested to see what other universities are doing in this arena, because it is massively important. Ollie's comments, 70% of people in industry will be Gen Z in a very short period of time. So they are interested, and we need to make sure that we are supporting them to the best of our ability. But if we can share best practice, which I think we're all open to, that's only going to help industry and also help our students.
Steve, thank you. And Karen, come to Karen.
Exactly, as we are planning to do through Prime, understanding universities globally in their approaches to this, building that picture of what are we doing as a Prime global community to understand what businesses want. Does that picture differ according to different geographic location? And what can we be doing in terms of skills development and preparing our students?
So there's a more than active research agenda for us to be moving forward with. This is not the implication, not that Karen and I are going to necessarily be investigating all of those areas, but it's an open invitation to any of our educators and researchers, or indeed our students or our companies and employers who are in the room who are interested in working with us and generating projects of this kind that could explore those kind of questions further. It is an open invitation, and you've got our ways of connecting with us, which Karen has been putting into the chat box as we go along. it remains at this point, given that we're now at 1 minute past 1, for me to say thank you so much to all of our panelists for their contributions to the research, but also their contributions to the panel today. I'd also like to say a big thank you to everybody who's joined us, because it's been a particularly mixed and diverse audience. It's been fantastic to have so many student questions coming through, mixed in with those coming from other backgrounds as well. It's been a very diverse audience, the most diverse we've ever had in our webinar series. So thank you to everybody for participating. We've got all your questions. We know there are a number of questions that haven't been answered. If we can't get back to you individually, we will seek to do that through with some response to that through our webpage, which you will have access to and which we can let you have subsequently. So from all of us on the panel and from Oxford Brookes and from Prime, thank you for being here and enjoy the rest of your Friday.